Has that, so the experience you had when you were sleeping and then you saw like your soul touch yourself record, like has that happened to you again since then?
No, never like that.
Never again.
No.
Sometimes it takes something though that visceral, like that real.
Yeah.
I also love that it was so subtle. Like you said, there wasn't emotion attached to it. There wasn't, you weren't like afraid or like.
Yeah, it was
like this,
I really got
I
saw it, and that was like all the message I needed. There wasn't no like explanation of it. It was just like, oh, that's what I did to myself. I gotta change something.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like, oh, I need to change this or I need to change that, but it was just like a knowing like I've got to change. And so since then it's been like a gradual exploration of like, okay, how do I optimize my experience?
Yeah. And so how long ago was that till now?
Probably 6 years.
6 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's been that's wow.
Yeah. And I mean, since then it's been a journey, and there's all kinds of stories in that, but it's optimizing my experience of life is pretty much like the theme of it. Yeah. And so that will never stop. It's like I'm going to continue that, and this time last year it meant one thing, and this time this year I'm on some other stuff, and it's always evolving.
Yeah. And it's becoming, how do I optimize not just my life, but how do I optimize other people's lives?
Exactly. Yeah. So like with the community stuff we were talking about at the beginning, it's like that desire to build those sorts of spaces and those environments for people and my friends and the entire world is born from how I grew up. Like I grew up in community, and there's so many beautiful aspects of that feel so natural to me.
Yeah.
It's the reason I love retreats. Like over the past few years I've been hosting retreats, and I always said like I want to own a retreat property because I love like being in community. Feels so good to me. It feels so natural because it's how I was raised. Yeah. And it's like we all had our little houses and stuff, but your friends are right next door, and everyone's eating meals together. We had shared cafeteria and a big communal kitchen, and we had the church, this big place of worship, and there were all the classrooms and school buildings, and everyone was there. And there's your family, but there's all these other families that you know really well, and people you know and trust that will take care of you, or you could go to. And so it's like that experience I've had, and I've experienced the opposite of that, and I know what feels better and what leads to greater well-being. And it's like I want as many people as possible to experience the former.
I'm curious your viewpoint, do you feel like that either spiritual communities or any kind of religious places like that have tainted people's viewpoint of that way of living? Because like that's a very natural like tribal way of like everyone lives within the same town, you all share things. But from my experience, I'm curious if yours is the same. There's like an underlying judgment towards it. It's like, oh well, if you live that way, it must be a cult.
Right.
And it's like, well, but why can't that just be like a good way of living?
Right. Exactly. So it's like having to separate the aspects that are supportive of life and well-being from the things that are more negative. And there's plenty of examples of communities where it didn't go so well. Yeah. And it went tragic in some instances, and those things got a lot of publicity. So it's not to say those things don't happen, but there are also successful communities, and there's places I learn about, especially as I talk more about this and share my vision for it. People ask me if I've heard of this place or that place, and there are other examples of places where they're doing this well. And I would say where I grew up, they did it very well. Like it existed for a long time, even before it was in Montana. It existed in California, and then it was in Colorado and the East Coast before that. It's like it was decades. And it wasn't just a bunch of hippies out in the woods trying to figure it out and like arguing with each other and getting high all day. Like they really had stuff figured out. And then there were the parts that were a little more shadowy and difficult to deal with. And there's people still, like people I grew up with are still dealing with those aspects. Like there's a lot of people around my age who grew up in it, and they are still struggling with it, or they're still in a victimhood around it where they feel like it ruined them in some way, and which I felt for a while as well. But it takes acceptance of it and moving past that to then have gratitude for it and really like get the gifts and the wisdom that it delivered.
Which you have done very well in that context of like you got the baby back from when you
Yeah,
That part.
exactly.
Like, wait, there actually was wisdom in that.
Oh,
Like,
yeah,
hold on.
yeah,
So you're
exactly.
still alive. Cool. Great. Let's circle back to what you were taught when you were little.
Yeah, definitely.
I really appreciate the theme in your story of like having experienced one side and then having experienced the other, because it's one thing to experience one side and then never make it over there, but you've been to both sides.
And
so
you came back.
Right, and so you know factually, like, no, this is where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
I've done the gamut.
Yeah, it feels like the most aligned thing. And it's like I was saying earlier, when I was just in lending, I was like, why am I even in this? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And just kept with it and got patient, and it's led to this. And then it's like, as I start communicating that this is what I'm doing more, and it's like now it's being recorded and making it more well known, like this is what I'm into, the connections just come, and it just feels so right. It's like, oh yeah, of course this is what you're doing.
Yeah.
Also, something I just thought of back to the whole like artist conversation we had, like what's your art? I feel like something some people don't realize. I think you obviously do realize this aspect. If you look at what most traditional artists that like perform either art, like painting or music or poetry, like they need to do that somewhere, right? They need to be able to sit somewhere. They need to actually have restaurants to go to after, and so it's like having someone like yourself who's aware on a spiritual level of how important that is, but also like, well, someone, like, you guys have to sleep, like you guys have to eat,
You gotta be somewhere.
right? Like
Yeah.
you need to have a space to go to. Like you can't just sing on the sidewalk. I mean, you can, but like I think that's really cool too, that that is your art in that sense.
Yeah,
Like
providing, and that's really what it feels like. It's like, I want this space to be a space where consciousness can expand.
Yeah.
And so optimizing the space for that and really encouraging it and bringing in the resources and the spaces and the connections to make that happen. And like, I envision this space being I think incubator was a word I used earlier, like an incubator and an accelerator, where it's like, we know so many amazing people, and and we're scattered throughout all of Austin, and it's like, how many people have to spend so much energy to then go do the thing that they love? It's like, by the time you get there, you've spent a lot of your energy, or it's been diffused in a way because you've had to get here, or you're in a space that's not optimal for whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah.
It's like, if that can all be dialed in, and you're living in an environment that is totally tailored to you bringing forth your gifts,
Yeah.
there's kind of things that can be created, it's going to be world changing. And that's the whole idea.
Yeah.
And to encourage that, and for everyone there to have an understanding, this is what we're doing. We're not creating this to hope that this happens. It's like, this is our intention, and this is the spot. And if you're into this, let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah. Well, we need someone like you, so I'm glad that you exist, man. I really
Thanks,
do.
man. Yeah, me too.
Like, I'm so glad that we know you and you're one of my
Yeah.
friends.
You want to ask your last question?
I love my last question. So if you could, well, actually, how old are you currently now?
30.
30, perfect. That's relevant just because the context of our podcast is like, we want people to see like how old everyone is that we're recording. Like, cool, like this is before Lance was at 30.
Yeah.
And then like in 5 years, whenever we have you on next.
Yeah.
So if you could give your 35 or 40-year-old self a message, encouragement, advice, anything that you want, what would that be?
My future self.
Yes.
I don't know if I've ever been asked that. It's usually the other way. Great question. So this will take a little bit of a backstory.
That's totally fine.
So
I would expect nothing less.
there's this, I think I first heard about this in a Joe Dispenza book, but there was this study they did in Israel where there was a group of 1,000 or some large number of patients in the hospital, and they started monitoring their health outcomes. So it's like, who recovered, who had to stay in the hospital for how long, who died. And so they had this big sample of people in the hospital or some facility, and then they had a group of people pray for those people. So like, have their names and just pray in whatever way felt good to them. Like, I hope this person gets better, or like send them some good energy or whatever. And they monitored it, and the people who were prayed for, it was all random, the people who were prayed for far and away had better health outcomes as far as recovery, time spent in hospital, all these sorts of things, mortality rates, all of it. And so that's cool enough. It's like, oh, praying works, like sending energy works.
Right.
But the crazy part about it was that the people who did the praying did it 10 years after those people had been in the hospital. So they were praying for people, and they didn't know it. All they had was a list of names. So they were praying for people in the future, and they had monitored the health outcomes, and the people who had got prayed for in the future recovered way better in the past.
That's mind blowing.
Yeah, so I heard about this, and same thing. I was mind blown. I was like, and it all makes sense. Like, I know you guys are probably all heard this as well, but it's like everything exists now. It's like the past, the present, the future. It all exists. And so if you think of yourself, it's like you're as energy. Like, yes, you have your body here, but like that's just a small focused part of your energy. And so I like to think of my energy as like it's kind of like a cloud. And this cloud is spread across all of time. And that's me. That's the energy of me in the past, in the present, and in the future. So when I learned all of this, I was like, I'm going to start sending my past self love and energy every day before I go to bed. So I haven't done it every night, but as much as I can remember, and when I talk about it, it builds up the momentum of it, and I tend to do it more. I'll send my past self, so say like a year ago, or even just the previous day. I'll do like a few years in the past, and then just the previous day, I'll send my past self some love and support, and just be like, hey, whatever you're going through, here's some love. Like, you got this. You're fine. You're gonna be fine. It's gonna get better. And so what I would tell my 35-year-old self is like, wherever you are, whatever, and it's like even as I'm speaking it now, it's like I'm connecting with that self, because I'm gonna remember this when I'm 35. That 35-year-old self, could you just send me some love right now, at whatever energetic level you're at now? Because I know, like, every day I'm becoming more aware, and my energy is increasing, and my creative potential and power, all this stuff. My 35-year-old self, man, he's powerful. Yeah. And so now he's sending me energy because he asked this question. So thanks.
Fucking cheat
What
code.
an answer, dude.
I love that so much.
That is incredible. Well, for what it's worth, this is episode whatever. This is before Lance was. It was absolutely sensational.
Thanks, guys. I love this. I love talking to you guys. I really appreciate you inviting me. Yeah. You guys are really easy to talk to, and I love your questions as well.
Thank you.
Can't wait to have you back. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to today's story. You can follow us on Instagram at before.they.were to stay up to date with what we are up to, and to get in contact with us and any guests we've had in the past. We hope you use these stories as a beacon to show that you are the master of your own life, and that no one can tell you how to live your life except for you. See you next time.